I appreciate you stopping by to check out yet another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Vintage Audio Review. In this episode, I'm going to talk about a mystery preamplifier. This is the Platinum Model One Preamplifier. Now, this was made by a company called Precision Electronics, and I could not find any information about the preamplifier or the company by searching the image or doing, even in the like AudioGon or AudioCom, I couldn't find one listing for this particular preamplifier, so it's a mystery. I'm guessing it was made in the mid-90s, plus or minus 5 years or so, between maybe 1990 to 2000 or early 2000s. I couldn't find anything about it, and it is a very high quality piece of audio gear. So this is a preamplifier that has its own power supply. This is the power supply for the Platinum Model One preamplifier, and it is all solid state, and I'll take the cover off and you'll see the problem that was going on with this unit when I got it and what it looks like inside as far as the technology that was used and all that. And then you'll see the measurements, and I'll have some listening results that I made on it, as well as we'll go over the tour of the front and the back of the unit. I'm guessing this was expensive when it was sold, just by the quality, just the way they built it and kind of the way it performed. Let's take a look at the front and then the back. There is a more detailed view of the Platinum FHT preamplifier, also known as the Model One. Starting on the right, we have power LED indicators for both the left and right channels. I don't know why we need separate LEDs for each channel. If your power supply isn't working, it's pretty useless. So to me, having two different LEDs is kind of silly, in my opinion. This guy right here that says normal and low, that is a muting switch, and when it is in the low position, as you'll see in the data, it puts in about 12 dB of attenuation. Our tape and source switches here, and that's for the tape monitor. We also have a right fine level control and a left fine level control here, as well as a volume control. The fine level controls adjust the balance in effect, so they will fine tune the gain for the left or right channel, and it makes it easier to get a precise balance between the left and right channels. I do like the idea that they are individual controls separated out, whereas a lot of times you have one potentiometer and it kind of moves between the left and right. This is a plus. All of these knobs are machined aluminum. They're solid and they are very nice. They have a nice feel to them. And there are no detents on the pot assemblies for any of those. This plate right here actually is a nicely machined piece of aluminum, and its purpose is to hide the thumb screw points of the knob, so you can't see where the thumb screw hole is that you would put an Allen wrench in to remove a nut or loosen the nut to get those knobs off. Also, we have our inputs right here. Now we have a spare input, a video input, a tuner input, a CD input, and an option. And the option would be for the phono stage, which this does not have, but if you did have a phono stage, it would be selected over here. And that kind of rounds out the front of the Platinum Model One preamplifier. This obviously is the rear of the Model One preamplifier, and starting on the right, these two inputs right here are for an optional phono stage, which we did not have on this preamplifier, and this right here is a grounding lug. Also, all of these connectors are gold plated, and basically we have a spare input connector here, and then these guys right here are our inputs. The top row would be your left channel input, and the bottom row is the right channel input. Right here and right here are spare outputs, and we have a main output number 2 here and a main output number 1 there. Here is our what looks to be our standard IEC power cord connector. Now, I'm going to show you in just a moment. There is no warning here, and you don't really know that you shouldn't plug a standard computer power cable into this. This is the same connector that is used on computer power supplies, and it's also the same connector that they used for their preamplifier power supply, which I'll show you in just a moment. I plugged in a 120 volt AC cord into that and heard a pop. It blew the fuse here, and luckily that's the only damage that happened. But we didn't even know we had a power supply for this unit, and that's part of the story you'll hear about in a bit later. Let me just show you the power supply. So this guy is our power supply for the unit. These cords are rather long. The one that plugs into the AC, this guy right here, that is 6 feet long, and the one that plugs into the preamplifier is about 9 feet long, and this is its end. Hopefully you can kind of see that. So it's got the end that plugs into here, just like your computer power supply. So that's one of my knocks on this design. These things weigh about, this is probably about 8 pounds, and the unit's probably about 20 pounds. So altogether it's a fairly hefty piece of gear for a preamp. On the top of the Model 1 preamplifier, there is a code for all the inputs and outputs right here, and they line up with the inputs and outputs that I showed earlier. What I wanted you to see was this caution right here and right here. So it points to the plug and it says, caution, preamplifier power supply connection only. Okay, so the problem was you could barely see this. You can see that it's like gray on top of black, or maybe a darker gray, so it's kind of hard to read that, and I'm not looking for warnings for this plug up here. And that's kind of how I accidentally plugged 110 volt AC right into the power for the preamplifier section. You can see this band where, like right here, that I guess that's how it's connected, but if you look right here where the teeth go into the chain, nothing really happens when you turn it. And for whatever reason, here is your volume pot right here, and it connects to both these sets of pots here for each channel, so it doesn't really engage them. It's a screwy thing. It just kind of just turns. So that's kind of what's going on with this thing, and I don't think I'm going to be able to find a replacement for this belt because I can't find anything at all about this company. But it's kind of a goofy arrangement. Never seen that before. Here is an inside view of the Platinum preamplifier with the cover removed. I kind of just wanted to give a little tour of it. And first off, you can see that we have all these RCA connectors here. They're all gold plated. Right here is an auxiliary input connector. I'm guessing maybe that was for a phono stage, possibly. Also note that each of the circuits of the preamplifier are inside these metal cubes. They kind of don't like to let anybody know what they're doing. I've also seen this kind of sealed module approach on the Van Alstyne preamplifier that I did a video on a ways back. Also, we have a lot of filter capacitors here, and it's kind of unusual because they have a separate power supply which plugs into the filtered connector there. Also, we have a couple of switches along here for different inputs. We have a fine balance control for the left channel here and another for the right channel here. This right here is my solution to the problem of the belt. Now, if you note, I think I'm going to zoom in on the part of the circuit here. So if you look at the fine balance controls here and here, and they're actually two potentiometers connected in parallel, and then they connect down here to the circuit board. And the way the volume control was, it had two potentiometers in series for each part of the volume control for the left and right, and they were all in driven by that little gear thing. There was a little video of that I did to start with that kind of caused the whole problem.
the way I solved it, it works, but it's not the way that it was designed. Is that I took one of those controls, I split them apart, and although they're not the same value, they're not going to give the same sensitivity as the original volume control. This does seem to work, this solution here. So instead of having two controls in series for each channel, which in theory would give you a finer control, I guess if you had a lot of power you were trying to run through it, it would also help with that, but this doesn't have a lot of power running through it at all for a preamp. So that solution worked. I just connected to the existing wires and covered things up with shrink tubing. It was easier than removing the solder from both sides of the board. Anyway, so that's kind of what's going on. This is a view looking towards the front of the Platinum preamplifier, just to see the switches. And you can see this is a real high quality unit, except for my little mod. The holes right here are where the bracket that held the potentiometers for the left and right volume controls, that's where that bracket mounted. And you can kind of just see how I ended up just using one of them, splitting it apart, and it connects to the volume control now, and it works. Maybe not as good as it did originally, but definitely it seems to work okay. I wanted to give a different view of the problem with the Platinum preamp, and this was part of the volume control. And what they did is they had a shaft come down on the knob, the big outer knob, and that volume knob is very big. There was a rubber bushing on the front panel, and then this knob went through that bushing to this thing, and you can see there's gears and on the pots and the shaft, and there would be another pot just like that over here. That is one that I'm using. And what they have done is connected the pots for each channel in parallel, and that would lower the resistance of the pot, and I guess the thinking is it would give it a better control range or smoother control range. I don't really know. I have never seen that done like this. And I mean, if you were trying to dissipate a lot of power, that would make sense, but this is for a preamp. There's really not any power going through it. But anyway, imagine another one of these over here for the other channel, and when you turn this guy right here, as you saw in the earlier video, it would turn the chain, and it would turn both of these at the same time, and that's how you would get your volume adjustment. And what I ended up doing was taking one of these off, removing the wires there, and then connecting it as a stereo pot that's ganged together. And while it's a different value, because now they're individual pots rather than two that are in parallel, so the resistance is different than the original design, it still seems to work just fine. And it works. I couldn't find any information on this preamplifier, as I've mentioned. And while it's kind of a clever idea, I think it was really kind of a dumb solution, because this belt broke. I think you can maybe see the missing teeth there. Just kind of like that, and then it won't turn. So that, and you can't find that belt. So that's kind of the deal. Let me just take that off, and you can kind of see the teeth. And anyway, that's the problem with the unit. Here we have the standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz, and the volume controls have been adjusted to give 0 dB gain. So we've got 2 volts going in and 2 volts going out. Now, by volume controls, I mean I adjusted the left and right fine-tune gain controls as well as the main volume control to get it as close to 0 dB. It's looking really good. We've got what our distortion, we'll call it 0.008%, maybe worst case. THD plus noise is minus 81 dB or so, and the SNRs are in at around 88 dB, so it's looking really pretty good. And I should point out that it does have a low and a high gain state or something on the preamp. I will switch that into the low state and see what difference it makes, but right now it is on the high state. So right now I switched the, I'm going to call it a gain state, to low. Before I said it was high, it actually said normal on the toggle switch on the front. So here it is switched in to the low state, and it looks like it attenuates the signal by about, we'll call it 13 dB. The THD improves a little bit, but the SNR is worse with that switched in. I don't know, maybe it's like a muting switch sort of, but that's kind of what that switch does. Right now I'm going to increase the gain or the volume and see how big of a output I can get with the Model One preamplifier, and we'll just slowly increase it and see what the distortion looks like as we increase the gain. So it's still looking pretty good. Oh, right about there it starts getting pretty bad, so back it down. So somewhere around, what, 3.8 volts might be the most that this thing could put out before it starts looking like crap, although it looks pretty good right here. But if I go just a smidgen more, yeah, not a lot more. So at 4 volts it looks like crap. If we back, well, it's not totally crap, but it doesn't look really good. And if I back it down just a smidgen, so we're at about 3.8 volts or so, it looks pretty good. So it just kind of gives you an idea for how much voltage this preamplifier can deliver before it starts looking bad. Here is a plot showing the frequency response of the Platinum Model One preamplifier. Our frequency range is from 10 Hertz to 40 kilohertz, and the volume control was adjusted for 0 dB gain, and we've got a 1 volt signal going in, or 0 dBV. You can see we're down about 0.5 of a dB at 10 Hertz. By the time we get to 20 Hertz, we are only down maybe 0.3 of a dB. And at 20 kilohertz, which would be right here, we're only down maybe 0.05 dB. And at 40 kilohertz, we're down maybe 0.3 of a dB. So this has an extremely good frequency response. I am using the CD input. There is no phono input on this particular preamplifier. I believe that was an option. All the inputs should look like this, and I'm in the normal gain state. Here we have the multi-tone test response for the Platinum Model One preamplifier, and like all the tests so far, I'm using the CD input, and it's set for 0 dB gain, and it's showing a pretty respectable 14 to 15 bits of distortion-free range. Here is a plot showing the crosstalk between the left and right channels. Once again, I'm using the CD input, and at the low end of the band, depending on whether you're looking at the left to the right or right to left, we're at between 92 and 96 dB of crosstalk, which is really, really good. It starts getting worse down to about, worst case, about 35 dB of isolation between the left and right channels at around 20 kilohertz. So that's kind of the minimum. Once again, there is no specification for crosstalk. Right now we're looking at the input isolation between the CD input and the tuner input. In this case, a signal is applied to the CD input. The tuner inputs are connected into shorts, and the tuner input is selected. So what we're looking at is the amount of leakage that is coming over from the CD input onto the tuner input. There, once again, is no specification for it, but it looks really good. I would say, depending on which channel it is, it's better than 70 dB worst case. So that is an idea of the input isolation, at least between these two channels. I'm sure it would change a little bit if I looked at another input. The tuner input is right next to the CD input, so I figured that would be the worst case for the isolation. Right now we're looking at the noise level of the Platinum Model One preamplifier, and in this case I'm using the tuner input, and that input is connected into shorts, and we're just looking at the noise level of the system, and we're seeing it's better than, we'll call it 85 dBV or minus 85 dBV to be correct. That happens at about 30 hertz. So that is related to the power supply, which is a separate power supply that you plug into the preamp, as you saw earlier. And other than that, it looks pretty clean, really.
With the help of a Facebook group that I belong to, I was able to determine more information about this mystery preamplifier. It was made by the parent company of Platinum, is a company called Agtron, which was a medical instrumentation kind of company, and there were several audiophiles in that company, including the president, and they formed Platinum from that Agtron main parent company. Now, they made some power amplifiers as well as this preamplifier with the separate power supply. Supposedly it's a Class A design, and they used a lot of computer analysis to model different aspects of the design. And in 1989, the version of the preamplifier with the phono preamp option sold for $3 grand, which would be about $7,400 today. And so that's kind of the mystery of this preamplifier. So at least we know about when it was made, how much it cost, and just a little bit more about the company. The company seems to have vanished, as far as I can tell, at least the Platinum company. I should mention that the reason I have the Model One preamplifier was that a buddy of mine, we'll call him Richard, had it lying around and said, hey, I got something you can test. I haven't used it before, and why don't you check it out and see what's going on with it. So he gave it to me. I finally got ready to test it, and in the back of it there is an IEC connector, as you saw on the video, and it turns out that's just a standard computer power supply kind of cord socket. And so I plugged in a normal cord into it, and I heard a pop, and it turns out there's a 3 amp fuse in the back that blew. So I go, that's not good. Pulled the cover off. I didn't see anything that had burned. And as you saw earlier on the top cover, there is a note that says only use the DC power supply for this preamplifier. Well, I didn't get a DC power supply for this preamplifier. In fact, when I told Richard the bad news, he said he wasn't sure if there was a power supply for it, but he would look around. Eventually, he found the power supply. So once I got the actual DC power supply for this unit and got the fuse, and needed a different fuse holder because the little spring that holds the fuse in wasn't there. Anyway, once I got it all going, I was able to measure and see how it tested, because it had that problem with the drive belt for the volume controls. Now, I kind of appreciate the thought in doing that with the drive belt driving the two different pots, and the pots are in parallel, and you know, it looks nice, but what a crappy thing to do as far as longevity of a unit. You know that a nylon belt that has teeth in it is eventually going to break, and you're like totally hosed. So I came up with my own solution, which worked fine for this unit. So maybe if it had the original setting, it may have performed a little bit better, but when I was manually adjusting the controls, I didn't think it performed any better than how I ended up modifying the controls. So anyway, be that as it may, that's just an interesting thing. So that's like a strike against it, that dual volume control design with the gears and the little drive belt. And to have the same socket as a power supply for your power supply without any big red or orange or warning signs on the back where you go to plug it in, that was just stupid on their part, both those things. So in my opinion, those are two strikes against it. Of course, I like to have tone controls on my preamplifier. I will give them kudos for the separate left and right volume fine-tune controls for the adjusting the balance. That's pretty unusual and appreciated. So as far as that, those are my only quirks about it. Oh, one other quirk. There is no master on-off switch, not on the power supply or on the unit. Once it's plugged in, it stays on. So I'm not a fan of that stuff, but that is the way they chose to design it. I suppose one could go in and easily add a switch on the front to kill the power to at least the preamp, but I don't think we're going to worry about that. For my listening test, I connected the Platinum Model One Preamplifier to my Bryson 2B-LP power amp, and I had my normal Surfans F20 music source, listened to a bunch of music, and I thought it sounded really good. I mean, I like to be able to boost up the bass a little bit to the Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2 speakers that I was using, and I couldn't do that, but it still sounded nice and clean, and I decided to do an A/B test between this and my venerable Carver C1 preamplifier. Now the Carver C1 was set so that the tone controls were out of the circuit and there was no sonic holography switched in, so it was basically preamp to preamp. And I set the levels up so that the gains of both preamps are exactly the same, and it sounded like they were pretty much, the two preamps sounded the same, switching between them instantaneously the way I do my A/B test with preamps. But I did hear a difference on certain music tracks, and I came to the conclusion that the Model 1 more often than not had a little bit more detail and maybe a little bit wider soundstage than the Carver C1, but a lot of the music I couldn't really hear any difference between the two, but when I did hear a difference, definitely this one stood out. So it's a very nice sounding preamp as well. It's very, very quiet, as you saw in the measurements. So that's kind of my take on this. Also, I am leaving my email address in the comment section so that you could send questions for an upcoming video if you have questions about something maybe not related to the video that I've done, but just in general. If I get enough questions that I can try to answer for a 10 to 15 minute video in the future, I would be more than happy to do it. So please send your questions to that email address. And once again, if you have not subscribed to the channel, it would be nice if you did that. If you liked the video, you know, always hit the like button. And until next time, have a great day or night.